Good evening. I trust you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I'm sure it has been a happy day. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the Blessed Noble and fully self-awakened one. So yesterday, the discourse we were tackling was the fear that people had that the order would go into some huge arguments and disruption once the Buddha died. In the same way that the Jains had done, if they had done. Remember, this is Buddhist propaganda. The lights keep going off and on for some spooky reason. So sometimes I'll be in the dark and sometimes I'll be in the light. I'll be enlightened. So now we're at Kosambi in Gosita's Park. Now at that time, the bhikkhus, the bhikkhus, the monks, were quarreling and brawling and were in deep disputes, stabbing each other with verbal daggers. They could neither convince each other nor be convinced by others, nor could neither persuade each other nor be persuaded by the other. And it got so bad that they went and, of course, somebody snitched on them to the Buddha, you see, to the Blessed One. So, of course, he called them. He went to see them, actually. And he said, is it true that you've been quarreling and brawling and all that sort of stuff? They said, yes, Venerable Sir. He says, what do you think, you see? And then he goes into this discourse. Now, this brawling was all about the Vinaya. So you might think to yourself, well, this big argument, which has really created this huge anger within the monastery, people shouting at each other and going into all sorts of disgraceful actions, you might think this is very important. But actually, it was because the teacher of the Dharma, so there was a teacher of the Dharma and a teacher of the Vinaya, of the discipline, of the rules and regulations. The Dharma teacher had not emptied the water pot in the toilet. He should have emptied it, it seems. Now, when the Vinaya Dara, the person who understands the Vinaya, saw this, he said, no, that's an offense. See, that's an offense, unless you didn't mean it. So the Dharma teacher said, well, I didn't mean it. He probably didn't even know, but anyway, it was an offense. Anyway, later on, the Vinaya teacher was talking to his students, telling them about this occasion. And they eventually came to the conclusion that even though it was unintentional, it was still an offense. So then the Dharma teachers, pupils and all that, got really upset about that. And before you know it, quarreling and all sorts of bad things, stabbing each other with verbal darts. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that's ridiculous. How could anybody get angry and all that? But to consider the arguments that perhaps you've not been in, but I remember other people, and occasionally I myself have fallen into arguments as to whether you leave the toilet seat up or down. Yeah, whether you put the milk in before you pour the tea or after you pour the tea. Whether a cup of tea is finished when you finish the tea and you just leave the pots hanging around, or when you wash the pots and put them away. So, and there was one I remember from childhood. My father was in the Royal Air Force during the war. And of course, and probably his family did it this way, but in the military, of course, you have to do things in a certain way. Now, when it came to polishing shoes and boots, you put the polish on with the cloth and you shine it up with the brush. Well, my mother was not going to have anything of that. She wasn't going to mess around with cloths and brushes. She just put it on with a brush and brushed it up. And I remember as a child, this roaring argument in the kitchen about how to put the polish on shoes, and they were really at each other. Can you imagine that? So these, whether we like it or not, we've got these little covert rules And when a friend or somebody comes and visits us and starts doing things like putting dirty pots directly into the water that's in the bowl rather than put them on the side, argumentation. So little things can spark into these huge arguments. And of course, we don't know the history of these two monks. They might not like each other. They might have been in some sort of argument before. But by the time the Buddha gets there, it's a big deal. Now, he says to them, he tries to give them advice. They won't listen to him. So he goes off and lives in the forest. And while he lives in the forest, he's looked after by an elephant who brings him fruits. And when a monkey saw the elephant doing that, the monkey also went off and got him food. Now, of course, that sort of story is far-fetched for us. But if you see some of the videos that are on the YouTube, some things are quite remarkable. And there's one that comes to mind. Somebody told me that they had visited a farm or something like that, a friend or whatever, and the horse was just in the barn. The door was open, but the horse was just standing in the barn. They parked the car and they opened the boot, and in the boot they put the cradle for the child, the little baby, and off they went to have a chat in the house. When they came back, because they could hear the baby crying a bit, when they came back, the horse had come out and was rocking the cradle with its nose. Fancy that. So, you can also find, I've got it on one of the web pages, Extraordinary Things. I can't remember the name of the web page, but there's a woman who can directly communicate with animals. So anyway, that's to the side. The point is that when the lay people found out that the Buddha had not been listened to, that the monks weren't ready to come to an agreement, they stopped feeding the monks. They stopped serving the monks, you see. Now, that's the power of the lay people, because the monastic orders, monks and nuns, are entirely dependent upon the gifts that lay people give them. The food, the clothing, the medicine, the housing, etc. So if lay people decide that these monastics are not behaving well and they don't support them, then basically they've either got to go and find another monastery or leave the order. So of course that brought them to the senses. And they bring the Buddha, they ask the Buddha to come back, the Blessed One, and then he talks to them. And this is what he says. Did you, on that occasion, when you were arguing and all that, did you maintain acts of loving kindness of body, speech, and mind in public and private towards your companions in the holy life? No, Venerable Sir. And then he says there are 6 memorable qualities that create love and respect and conduce to helpfulness, to non-dispute, to concord, and to unity. The first 3 are pretty straightforward: to maintain bodily acts of loving kindness, both in public and in private, towards your companions, your friends, etc. The second one is the verbal acts of loving kindness. The third, the mental acts of loving kindness. Now, the fourth is sharing with them any gain of a kind that accords with the Dharma and has been obtained in a way that accords with the Dharma, including even the contents of your bowls. So in other words, sharing what we have is a really lovely way to create that relationship where it's difficult to get into big arguments. And then, of course, to live a virtuous life. So the virtues that are unbroken, untorn, unblotched, unmottled, liberating, commended by the wise, not misapprehended, and conducive to concentration or to meditation. So that people are affected, should we say, they honor and respect people who are virtuous, you know, and who come across virtuous. Just think of politicians, for instance. And then there's the holy life, that is that view. So this is that understanding, that a person holds the understanding that the view that is noble and emancipating leads one to practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. So that the view is, of course, the one of the Eightfold Noble Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. All these things are conducive to helpfulness, non-dispute concord, and to unity. But then he goes on to say, but the highest of all these six is that view that is noble and emancipating, and leads the one who practices in accordance with it to the complete destruction of suffering. So, in a sense, the Eightfold Noble Path includes everything he just said. And how does one practice with that? Okay, how does one get to this point? Or how do you put this into practice, this view? So, gone to the forest, to the root of a tree, to an empty hut, in other words, to meditate. So in other words, to bring this into everyday life as well as the sitting, but in everything that we do, to bring the Eightfold Noble Path. The Noble Eightfold Path. I keep saying that, don't I? So, so a person might be obsessed with sensual lust, sensual desire, obsessed by ill will, obsessed by sloth and torpor, obsessed by restlessness and remorse, obsessed by doubt. So these, of course, are your 5 hindrances, which, of course, you know. And the next one is not to be absorbed in speculation about the world. Oh my goodness, where COVID, Brexit, the world, oh, too much. See, not to be absorbed in that sort of speculation, and not to be absorbed in the speculation of the other world. So I don't think that bothers we Westerners very much. We don't tend to think about the next life, except something might happen, and of course something might not. So those are the things that he's obsessed with. The 5 hindrances, which are, of course, sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse, doubt, that skeptical doubt, the doubt that stops you doing something, speculation about the world, worries about the world, all that sort of stuff, and about future lives. Now, when he comes to understand that no obsession is unabandoned in myself, no obsession unabandoned in myself that might so obsess my mind that I cannot know and see things as they actually are. So now the heart's been purified to a point that you can really begin to see things as they really are. My mind is well disposed for awakening to the 4 noble truths. When I pursue, develop, and cultivate this view, I personally obtain serenity. I obtained quenching. That means the lessening of these desires. And then he also understands that there is no recluse or Brahmin outside the Buddha's dispensation, which is possessed of a view such as I possess. So that's the confidence in the Buddha's teachings. And then there's that ability. Do I possess the character of a person who possesses right view? That there's that ability to know when you've done something wrong, to accept it, confesses, reveals, and discloses it here to the teacher or to wise companions. But basically, the ability to know you've done something wrong and to put it right, to apologize, etc. Just as a young, tender infant lying prone at once draws back when he puts his foot or hand on a live coal. So in other words, any time we approach anything which is unwholesome, unhelpful, unbeneficial to ourselves, to others, we just sort of bounce off it. So that's the sensitivity of a virtuous person. Although Although he may be active in various matters for his companions in the holy life, yet he has a keen regard for training in the higher virtue, training in the higher mind, training in the higher wisdom. Just as a cow with a new calf, while she gazes, watches her calf. So basically, even though we're busy in our daily lives, there's always that inclination to keep an eye on our awareness, on our mindfulness, and of course, our practice. So these are the 5 things that are conducive, which is to know that these obsessions have been abandoned, or, you know, we're close to it. To pursue, develop, and cultivate. I personally obtain serenity, personally obtain quenching. That's number 2. So in other words, feeling calmer about my life, being able to understand myself and how the world works, etc. Spiritually speaking, I mean, that have this confidence in the Buddha's teachings. That as soon as I do something wrong, I'll put it right. I apologize and put it right. That I'm constantly moving, I'm constantly inclining, as the Buddha would say, inclining to Nibbana, which means looking at my life, constantly being aware, mindful. And it's not that you're being self-critical. You're not supposed to be hunting yourself down and pointing at yourself and criticizing yourself. It's just the relaxation into present moment mindfulness. That's all. And every time it wanders, just keep bringing it back very patiently. And then, do I possess the strength of one? So he said, yes, the strength comes when on hearing the Dharma, he heeds it, gives it attention, engages with it with all his mind, hears the Dharma with eager eyes. So that's when a person knows he's got the strength from the right view. And do I possess the right? And the second one is that when he listens to the Dharma and when he practices virtue, he gains inspiration in the meaning, gains inspiration in the Dharma, gains gladness connected to the Dharma. In other words, it gives your life a certain deep meaningfulness. When a noble disciple is thus possessed of 7 factors, he has well sought the character for realization of the fruit of stream entry. So in other words, these are the sorts of reflections that a person can have, which leads them to that level, the first attainment of stream entry, which is that moment when somebody actually perceives in some way or other the truth of Nibbana. So, of course, here, this is what the Blessed One said, and the bhikkhus were satisfied, and in this particular case, were delighted in the Blessed One's words. So this is the Buddha. He's been brought into a fierce argument between these monastics. He's tried to do his best. They won't listen to him. Can you imagine that? They won't listen to him. So he goes away. The lay people are shocked by this. They stop supporting the monks. The monks come to their senses. They bring the Buddha back, and he gives them this teaching. And hopefully that puts an end to all these silly arguments. So, you know, a lot of this stuff pertains to ordinary daily life in society. So I can only hope that it has been inspirational, and that you're very persistent in your bringing yourself back into this present moment, and that by doing so, you will be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later. So we can do a bit of practice.